We are going to look at what parts recipes have, ingredients that are used in them. We're going to look at cooking terms that are used in instructions to help you understand how to read your recipe to create food that's the same every time you make it. First off, recipes have many different parts. One of the parts that's most important is the title. If you don't have a title telling you what this is, it's a mystery. You can use your ingredients and follow the instructions and see what ends up coming out. All recipes should have a title. Recipes also have the ingredients listed. If you don't know what you're putting in and how much, you're not going to be able to make anything. The ingredients are listed in order of the amount needed. For example, the largest volume comes first. So for these official Scooby Snack recipe title, we would need 2 cups of flour, and it goes clear down to the smallest amount of 1 teaspoon of walnut extract if we're not looking at the optional 1 ounce of finely ground herbal medicine. So it goes from 2 cups to 1 cup to half cup, another half cup, a quarter pound or 1 stick of butter, 2 eggs, 2 teaspoons of vanilla, 1 teaspoon of walnut extract. Ingredients are listed separately from the instructions to help you find them easier. So you can quickly look and go, hey, do I have everything I need to make this recipe or not? Next are the instructions. All recipes should have instructions. They explain how you put it together. They have their own language though, so a lot of the words and vocabulary terms used you might not immediately know what are, and you'd have to look up to know how to make it correctly. Other things included in recipes would be the yield, how much it makes, and serving size. How much of what it makes should you actually eat? For example, this recipe says it makes a yield of 4 servings, with each serving size being about 2 cups of pasta. Once again, the title. Okay, some cooking terms that you would need to know are these. So here we go. First cooking term is beat. When we beat, we are usually mixing a mixture very rapidly to make it smooth. This is usually liquid. We might be beating it to get some bubbles in there. Just make sure it's mixed really good. Boil is the next one. When we boil, we have a liquid that is on the stove, and it's hot enough that bubbles rise and actually break on the surface. See all these bubbles? They're actually bursting on the surface. Water boils at 100 degrees Celsius, or I believe it's 215 degrees Fahrenheit. This is the actual point when liquid is changing into a gas. It's a state change. Our next one is chop. Chop is literally when we just cut food into small pieces with a knife. We're not concerned about the shape or size as long as they're all about the same size. To core, we are going to remove the center of a fruit or a vegetable. You can use this cool core that you just slide in and pull out. A lot of corers also include ways to slice the apple around, or you can use a paring knife to core whatever you're doing. Sometimes you can use a spoon if it's soft like zucchini. Cream. To cream, we are blending or mixing well until it's light and fluffy. The trick is we are mixing sugar plus a fat. So whenever we start cookies, we always cream the sugar and the butter, the fat, together first to make sure it's nice and smooth and a little bit fluffy. And then we can add things like eggs after. But creaming is specifically sugar plus our fat and mixing until it's really smooth. The sugar will actually dissolve into the fat and make it very smooth. Cut in is very similar to cream, but different. We'd use a pastry blender, and we're going to mix our shortening, our fat, with flour. And we're basically going to just chop up our butter and make flour surround it so we get all these little pebbly sized pieces. You could use 2 knives if you don't have a pastry blender or even a knife and a fork, but the pastry blender is easier. What this does is it surrounds your little bit of butter or shortening or lard, depends on what fat you're using, with flour. So when you cook it, it ends up flaky, like a nice flaky pie crust or a croissant. So cut in is flour plus our fat until it's pebbly. Cream is sugar plus our fat until it's nice and smooth and creamy. Make sure you know the difference between those two. Okay, to fold in or fold, we're going to gently combine two mixtures by taking our rubber scraper down around the bottom of the bowl and pulling it up over top. Maybe I'm making waffles and I have my batter and I'm adding some beaten eggs to make it nice, light, and fluffy. I'm going to carefully and gently fold the batter underneath up over the egg whites to not knock the air out of the egg whites so it's nice and fluffy still. To grate, literally you're going to rub food on a tool that has these different serrations that separate or shred the food into smaller pieces. Grease is when we spread a thin layer of shortening or oil onto your baking pan. This is going to prevent the food from sticking. You can literally take a cube of butter and rub it around in here. Or there's a lot of aerosol spray things like cooking spray that you can spray in there and get a layer of fat or oil around it to grease the pan so your food won't stick. Very important thing to do. Okay, kneading is we're making dough, usually bread dough. It's usually a yeast rising dough, but not always. And we're just going to work this dough with the palms of our hands. We're going to pull this down over and then smush it down and pull it over and repeat to build the gluten in the bread dough. The gluten is the elasticy fill to it that allows it to catch and trap our carbon dioxide given off by the yeast so that it can rise. If it's not elasticy, the carbon dioxide and other gases are just going to escape and our bread won't rise. But if it's elasticy, it will catch that gas and rise and be nice and fluffy. Pare is another term for peeling. Literally, we're just going to remove the skin of a fruit or vegetable by peeling, either using a knife or a peeler. But pare is another way we can say it. Preheat is literally to heat the oven prior to using in order to obtain the correct cooking temperature. I would turn my oven on to the 400 degrees I need it to be, but it's going to take a while to get there. So it's going to preheat and heat up until it gets to be that 400 degrees. And after it gets there, then I can put my food in and cook it. Please note, cooking, especially baking, is basically a science experiment. If you do not use the correct temperature when you first put the food in, there is a high chance that the different reactions are not going to happen when they're supposed to, and your food will turn out different. You should preheat your oven so that it's at the correct temperature when you want to put your food in. For example, in our food slabs, you should probably, as soon as you come in to cook, turn on your oven so that it can get up to temperature before you're ready to put your food in. Or you're going to have a hard time being able to eat before the end of class. Saute. This is when we got our frying pan and we have a small amount of fat. It's like maybe we put some olive oil or other oil in here, or we even melted some butter. And we're just going to cook our food in this small amount of fat in the fry pan. Please note, it gets really hot and you're going to need to constantly stir it so that nothing burns. Simmer is when we heat our liquid in a pot on the stove till it's just below boiling. The bubbles aren't actually reaching the surface and bursting, it's just below it, so it's a nice hot temperature and allows the flavors to just simmer and build and work together. Great for soup or stew. This is a stew. Stir is to mix ingredients using a circular motion until well blended. Use a stick, in this case, with this gigantic pot of spaghetti. Or you could just be using a wooden spoon, a spatula, or other mixing equipment that you have. Toss is when we're going to mix foods lightly together using a lifting motion with 2 forks or a fork and a spoon. Like a tossed salad where I have my lettuce and all my other toppings and some dressing, and I'll just kind of grab it and pull it and toss it to get the dressing mixed evenly through the whole salad. Whip would be our next term. When we whip, we're going to beat very, very rapidly to actually incorporate air to make it light and fluffy. For example, whipped cream. Cream is a liquid, basically the same as milk, just has a different fat content. And if we whip it enough to add air, it becomes this thick, fluffy thing. For example, in this picture, this is not whipped cream. We got some eggshells in the back. This is whipped egg whites, where we actually very well beat these egg whites. They're stiff and fluffy. And then we can add them into a mixture like pancake batter by folding gently to not lose those air bubbles and have nice fluffy pancakes.